In the shadows of a cold and sterile waiting room, where the ticking of an old clock blended with the distant echo of doors closing like final verdicts, a gaunt man sank into a plastic chair, his pale skin under flickering fluorescent lights that blinked as if even they doubted their own existence. Clutching a crumpled diagnosis in his trembling hands, a cancer verdict that devoured his days like an invisible fire. And just as the doctor, with a cold and disinterested gaze, uttered the words that sealed his fate, "We're sorry, we can't treat you here without upfront payment," the silence shattered with the distant roar of engines approaching like an inevitable storm, promising that justice sometimes arrives on wheels of steel and black leather. On the outskirts of a city forgotten by time, where streets lost themselves in a maze of gray buildings that seemed to exhale dust and resignation, with every gust of dry wind dragging torn papers and discarded memories, lived a man named Tomas Rivera, a retired mechanic whose life had been woven with hot asphalt and black oil from engines roaring in the night like sleeping beasts that only he knew how to awaken, his hands marked by deep scars, silver lines narrating stories of nuts tightened under storms, broken chains on nameless roads, entire nights illuminated by the bluish light of a workshop lamp while repairing motorcycles for those who lived on society's fringes, men and women with leather vests and gazes that didn't ask permission to exist. But now, in the twilight of his days, when the sun sank behind abandoned factories like a weary eye that no longer wanted to see more, his body betrayed by rebellious cells multiplying in silence in the shadows of his lungs and bones, leaving him bedridden on an improvised bed among rusty wrenches and empty oil cans in his dusty workshop, where the pungent smell of old gasoline mixed with bitter medicines that barely alleviated the internal fire consuming him, and every breath was a cruel reminder of the fragility that cancer imposed, stealing not only the strength that once allowed him to lift a Harley with one hand, but the dignity that defined him as an unbreakable man, someone who had never knelt before anyone, neither the law nor fate. Tomas had sought help in local clinics, wandering endless hallways of worn linoleum with crumpled forms in hand, his broken voice, once deep and firm like the roar of a V-twin, now barely a whisper pleading for a treatment that could extend his months in this world, a world that no longer recognized him under pale skin and eyes sunken by constant pain. But at every door he met the same invisible wall, cold bureaucracy like the steel of a diagnosis, insufficient insurance that didn't cover even half of what was needed, and a system that valued money over life, weighing suffering in dollars and cents while he bled out in silence. Until that fateful afternoon, under a leaden sky-threatening storm at St. Raphael Clinic, a white and aseptic building that seemed more prison than sanctuary, an administrator in an impeccable tie and empty eyes, as empty as the forms he signed without looking, denied him access to vital chemotherapy, citing unbreakable policies and pending debts with the coldness of someone reciting a learned script. leaving Tomas alone in the parking lot, the rain beginning to fall like tears the sky shed for him, his steps dragging slow and heavy back to a home that now seemed a premature tomb, where every tool hanging on the wall was a mute witness to the life slipping through his fingers. And while the rain pounded the tin roof like impatient fingers on a coffin, something inside Tomas, an ember of the strength that once led him to cross deserts on a brakeless bike, began to burn again, not with hope, but with the certainty that he still had one card to play. One he had kept for decades, hidden under layers of pride and silence. But before that spark turned into a blaze, the days became a blur of pain and memories, and it was in the darkness of a moonless night when Tomas, with trembling hands on an old phone, dialed a number he hadn't touched in years. A number that connected to a world where loyalty is measured not in money, but in blood, sweat, and the roar of engines that never surrender. As the days faded into a blur of pain and despair, hours melting into one another like drops of oil in a dirty puddle, where midday light was barely a dim glow filtered through tattered curtains, and the wall clock seemed to have forgotten how to move. Tomas lay motionless in his improvised bed, his body turned into a battlefield where cancer advanced mercilessly, gnawing at his bones like an invisible wolf feeding on memories and strength, leaving only shreds of what once was a man capable of disassembling an engine blindfolded and reassembling it before dawn. In those moments of stolen lucidity between waves of fever, his mind returned to the years on the road, to those times when the wind cut like a blade and the asphalt was a black river carrying him from one local Hells Angels chapter to another, not as a full member with vest and patches earned in blood, but as a silent ally. The mechanic who appeared in the night with a toolbox and a flashlight between his teeth, repairing machines wrecked by accidents, chases, or simple breakdowns under torrential rain, earning respect not with fists or loud words, but with the precision of someone who knows every bolt as if it were part of his own flesh. They were nights when the workshop became a refuge. Bikes tilted on stands, welder sparks illuminating weathered faces, beer bottles passing hand to hand while stories were told of forbidden routes and laws that didn't apply beyond the horizon. Tomas never asked for a patch, never swore the full code, but he was there when needed, when a Harley refused to start 100 miles from any town, when a bullet had pierced a gas tank, when a brother fell and needed someone other than the police to see the scene. And now, in the suffocating quiet of his illness, with cancer whispering promises of oblivion in every joint, he decided to make a call he hadn't in decades. With trembling fingers that could barely hold the receiver of a dust-covered landline, he dialed a number he still remembered by heart, one that connected to Jax, the giant with a gray beard and voice like wet gravel, president of the local chapter, whose laugh could fill an entire bar and whose silence could empty it completely. When Jax answered, his gravelly voice on the other end brought immediate echoes, distant engine roars, the jingle of chains, oaths of loyalty sealed in blood and beer spilled over splintered wooden tables. Tomas didn't beg, he didn't cry. He just spoke with the resignation of a man who has already seen the end of the road and only asks that someone else see it too. He told him everything, the diagnosis, the clinic, the administrator, the rain, the closed door, and hung up. But the news didn't stay in that call. It spread like a wildfire in dry season. First to whisper in a hidden bar behind an abandoned gas station, then a coded text message, then an impromptu meeting under dim lights where shadows danced on walls covered with old photos and faded flags. The bikers gathered in silence, their vests creaking like old skin, the air thick with the smell of weathered leather, stale tobacco, and the static electricity of contained rage. With each retelling, the tension grew. How could a system abandon a man who had given so much without asking anything in return? Where was mercy in a world of invoices, protocols, and digital signatures that weighed more than an agonized body? Who decided that a mechanic's life was worth less than a bank balance? Outside, the rain pounded metal roofs like war drums, each drop a collective heartbeat, each thunder a warning. And somewhere, in the dimness of a remote garage, a decision began to shake tape, one that wouldn't be written on forms, but in the roar of engines that would soon cross the city like a sentence. But before dawn brought justice, the night filled with smoke, flashlights, and hardened faces around a table marked by years of plans and promises. Because when the Hell's Angels decide to move, they don't do it with words, but with the certainty that no brother falls alone into darkness. When the decision was made in a clandestine meeting in a remote garage, a rusted hangar on the city's outskirts, where the wind whistled through broken metal sheets and the smell of burnt oil mixed with the night's humidity, lit only by flashlights hanging from rusty chains and the orange glow of cigarettes burning slow like promises no one dared break. The Hell's Angels gathered around an improvised table, made from a beer barrel split in half and covered with a steel sheet scarred by years of plans, pacts, knives stuck in, and spilled glasses. There were no chairs, just men standing, broad shoulders under black vests that creaked when they moved, patches sewn with red thread telling of wars, losses, victories, and names no longer spoken aloud. Their faces, hardened by thousands of miles, by suns that burned skin and nights that froze blood, reflected not blind rage, but a deep, ancient loyalty that transcended time, money, and even death itself. One by one, they remembered Tomas, not with speeches, with gestures. A finger pointing to a scar on a bike's handlebar leaning against the wall. He fixed that after we crossed the desert with a hold tank. A silence when someone pulled out an old crumpled photo of a campfire in the middle of nowhere, where Tomas appeared from behind, wrench in hand, and a barely visible smile under the firelight. Another recalled the night the police had them surrounded in a motel parking lot, and Tomas, without vest, without patch, without anything officially linking him, stayed until the end, lying calmly, deflecting questions, keeping secrets that could have destroyed them all. And now, that same man, who never asked for anything, who was always there when needed, lay alone, devoured from within, abandoned by a system that didn't understand what it meant to be a brother. The cigarette smoke swirled in the air like guardian spirits, rising to the black ceiling, forming figures that seemed to watch, judge, wait. No one spoke of violence. It wasn't necessary. The code was clear. No brother falls alone into darkness. It didn't matter if Tomas never wore the full patch. It didn't matter if he never swore at the table. He was in the circle. He always had been. And when Jax, with a voice deep as if coming from the earth itself, struck the table with his fist, not hard, just firm, like closing a book that no longer needed rereading, everyone understood. It wasn't vengeance, it was justice. It wasn't chaos, it was order. The order of those who live outside the law, but inside a code older than any constitution. They looked at each other, nodded, extinguished the cigarettes against the table, and in that silence heavy with emotion, where the smoke still floated like a sacred veil, they swore to act, not with bullets, not with fists, but with the unbreakable force of their brotherhood, with the presence that makes those who only know the power of money and paperwork tremble. If you believe loyalty still holds meaning in this fractured world, subscribe to Hell's Road, because stories like this are far from over, and every subscription binds us on the path. And as the night faded into a dirty gray before dawn, the engines began to warm up one by one, the low and steady roar like a collective heartbeat. Because when the Hell's Angels prepare to cross a door, they don't do it as individuals, but as a single shadow with steel wheels and an unbreakable oath. As they prepared for the dawn that would change everything, a dawn that wouldn't arrive with the softness of a new day, but with the precision of a sentence written in steel and leather, the Hell's Angels moved in the garage dimness like shadows with purpose, adjusting their vests with calloused fingers that knew every stitch, patches hand-sewn on nights of drunkenness and victory, frayed edges from the wind of nameless routes, symbols telling stories of loyalty forged in the fire of adversity, of brothers fallen in ditches, of promises kept under the moon. Each one checked his machine with the devotion of a ritual, an oiled rag over the chrome, a final tweak to the carburetor, a glance at the tire, like checking a friend's pulse before battle. They mounted with silent determination, no shouts, no orders, just the click of helmets, the creak of leather, the first deep vroom that shook the concrete floor. The engine roar rehearsed the symphony that would soon fill the streets, not chaos, but an orchestra tuned by years on the road, each cylinder a heartbeat, each exhaust a note in a score only they could read. And in that moment of introspection, as the night wind entered through open doors, bringing echoes of past lives, laughter at campfires, tears at funerals, oaths whispered over hot engines, they remembered that their colors weren't just black fabric with red thread. They were armor against the world's indifference, against those who measure life in dollars, against the loneliness that kills faster than any bullet. You can carry that same spirit of resilience and brotherhood. Our official Hell's Road store is linked in the description. for those who live by the code and seek emblems that speak without words. With the sun barely peeking on the horizon, an orange line cutting the sky like a freshly opened wound, the caravan of bikes set off. It wasn't an exit, it was an inevitable procession. A line of black shadows snaking through sleeping avenues, headlights off, engines low, like a river of steel heading toward the clinic where injustice had taken root, and where they would soon learn that some walls aren't torn down with fists, but with presence. And when the first ray of sun touched the St. Raphael Clinic sign, the automatic doors opened with a hiss, not to receive patients, but to face what was rolling in from the darkness. In the climax of that tension-laden morning, where the air itself seemed to hold its breath, thick with the smell of hot asphalt, and the distant echo of engines still vibrating in the chests of those who had shut them off, the automatic doors of St. Raphael Clinic opened with a mechanical hiss that sounded like the last sigh of a system about to break, revealing an impeccable line of motorcycles parked in the lot like guardians of steel forged in stormy nights and endless routes, their black silhouettes cut against the rising sun, chromes flashing like defiant eyes, and one by one, with the precision of a sacred ritual, the engines shut off in sequence. Vroom, vroom, silence. A silence that weighed more than any shout, more than any threat, an emptiness that filled the space with the invisible force of men who didn't need to raise their voices to be heard. The Hell's Angels entered in perfect formation, not like a gang, but like a legion. Heavy boots echoing on the freshly waxed linoleum floor, each step a collective heartbeat that shook the white walls, that froze receptionists with half-filled forms, that made waiting patients look up with a mix of fear and reverence, their eyes fixed, not on weapons, not on fists, but on the administrator, who moments before had denied life to Tomas with the coldness of someone signing a receipt. That man in an impeccable tie and hollow gaze, who now stepped back once, twice, feeling for the first time the weight of something that couldn't be filed or invoiced. And without a single word of threat, no insults, no gestures, just with the imposing presence of men bound by a tie stronger than steel, older than any insurance policy, forged on roads where loyalty is measured in miles and scars, they demanded the case be reconsidered. Not with violence, but with the absolute certainty of those who know true justice doesn't always come wrapped in white coats and medical titles, but in black vests sewn with the weight of eternal loyalty, of promises that don't expire, of brothers who aren't abandoned. And in that instant of emotional confrontation, where time stopped, where unshed tears pooled in everyone's eyes, from the administrator to the last biker, from the nurse watching in silence, to the security guard who didn't dare move, the wall of bureaucracy,
that invisible wall built with protocols, debts, and excuses, cracked. Not with a bang, but with a soft, almost imperceptible creak. And through that crack, Tomas received the treatment his cancer urgently demanded, not as charity, not as a favor, but as a right reclaimed. A moment of redemption that echoed like engine roars in a desert canyon, deep, long, impossible to ignore. And as the hospital machines began to hum like allies in an internal war, Tomas no longer fought alone. Outside, under the sun now burning strong, the bikers stood in silence, not as conquerors, but as sentinels of a fulfilled promise.
Come the conflict resolving in a collective sigh of relief, a sound that was neither shout nor laugh, but something deeper, like air escaping a tire punctured for years, as Tomas lay at last in a real hospital bed, not the improvised one in his workshop, but a clean one, with white sheets smelling of disinfectant and second chances, connected to machines humming with the constancy of loyal allies in his internal battle. Beep, beep, drip, drip. The entire clinic, under the watchful gaze of the bikers remaining outside like silent sentinels, their figures cut against the midday sun, helmets in hand, vests gleaming, without moving, without speaking, just being, initiated the protocol that had been denied with such coldness hours before. Chemotherapy began to flow through Tomas's veins, not as a miracle, but as a right reclaimed with the force of those who don't ask permission to exist. And in that moment, something changed. Not just in Tomas's weakened body, where rebellious cells began to retreat before the chemical invasion, but in the air itself. Not only hope was restored, that worn word now gaining real weight, but a deep faith in humanity that cancer, with its slow cruelty, had tried to erode drop by drop, day by day. The clinic was no longer a place of rejection. It was a field where brotherhood had won, and it left a subtle warmth amid the darkness. No blinding light, no fireworks, but a slow heat, like an engine cooling after a long ride. A reminder etched in the hallway silence that even in the bleakest corners, where death whispers empty promises, brotherhood can ignite a light that doesn't flicker, that doesn't go out, that dispels shadows without needing words. Some roads lead to redemption, others to eternal memory, and if you want to keep that flame of loyalty alive, the official Hell's Road store is linked below, where brotherhood lives beyond the tales told. And when the sun began to set, tinting the sky red as if the world itself bled in honor of what had happened, Tomas, from his window, watched the bikes pull away slowly, not as victors, but as guardians no longer needed, leaving behind a silence that spoke louder than any roar. In the epilogue of this saga, as the sun set over the city, tinting the asphalt in reddish hues like blood diluted in water, Tomas reflected in his now silent workshop, his hands still trembling but infused with new strength from the ongoing treatment, thinking of what was lost in the struggle, stolen days, invisible pains, but also what was found. A network of loyalty extending like roots underground, a code of dignity transcending imminent death. And in that poetic quiet, where the wind whispered through abandoned tools, symbolizing a symbolic closure like engines fading into the distance, the lesson crystallized in the air. True strength lies not in the body, but in the bonds tying us to others, offering second chances in a world that often denies them, and reminding us that human dignity, once threatened, can be reclaimed with the collective roar of those who choose not to look away. This was one of many forgotten legends of the road, echoes of lives intertwined on eternal asphalt. So subscribe to Hell's Road and ride with us into the next story, where darkness meets light on the infinite horizon.